So in this final segment, I will try within 10 minutes to pack a series of important events that occurred during the First World War and help us understand the course of the war and also the shape of the coming world order, which will be the subject of our next lecture. As I said earlier, in the beginning of the war, there's this wide-held assumption in many different parts of the world that it will be a short conflict that won't last long, and it will lead to some kind of regeneration of the world. Well, this is far from reality. By 1917, this war, the First World War, has turned out to be a global war, be a very costly war in terms of human lives and livelihoods. And third, there is no clear winner on the military side of things. Everyone is entrenched. Everyone is holding, like not making any advance, and most soldiers are just trapped in the trenches, really. Now, in 1917, a number of events happen that have huge repercussions about how the war will play out and also how the world will look after the war ended. And I will mention here three such events. One, the American entry in the war. What is it that precipitates the Americans to enter the war? There's been sustained propaganda on the behalf of the British and the French in America to get the Americans on board, to help them win the war against Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. The event that tilts the balance is the sinking of the American cruise ship Lusitania on April 1917. And this comes as a result of a long and sustained submarine warfare battle between Germany and the Allies. So this is a key event because the American entry in the war speeds up the process and the discussion about war aims, what kind of war aims does Britain and France have, and also becomes a factor that kind of is seen as helping the Allies on the military and strategic front. By the Allies, I mean the Entente. The second event that doesn't have many immediate effects, but will have great effects in shaping the future of the Middle East in the next decades, is the so-called Balfour Declaration. I don't know how many of you are aware of the Balfour Declaration. It is a promise that, in the form of a letter, which you can see in this slide, that the British government gives to Zionist leaders, guaranteeing the establishment of some kind of national home. The term national home is important here, for the Jewish people in Palestine. At the time, during the First World War, Palestine is a province of the Ottoman Empire. However, the question of Palestine takes us to another broad set of questions and considerations which have to do with the shape of the world outside Europe, in this case, the Near and the Middle East, in the event of an Allied win. During this time, there's a lot of secret treaties and negotiations, especially between Britain and France, on how this part of the world will look like and what kind of spheres of influence there will be. And obviously the great European powers such as Britain and France are interested in maintaining and even expanding their own power. The problem that this particular declaration brings is that in order for the British to win the war, they kind of have to promise different things and conflicting things to different nationalist groups. The Balfour Declaration is a promise to the Zionists. There are other treaties and promises to Arabs in Palestine and elsewhere. So that creates a confusion that will be evident in the region after the war. However, I said earlier, before I move to the third point, that the American intervention played a key role. And it also played a key role because it gave a framework for imagining how the world would look like after an Allied win. And this framework is provided by President Wilson and his famous 14 points. Some of them, and they're articulated in the in January 1918 as principles upon which any settlement, any post-war settlement should rely on. And this is freedom of the seas, among other things, impartial adjustment of all colonial claims. This is dubious. Readjustments or frontiers of various frontiers based on lines of nationality and the support of the autonomous development of the people. And we find that in different spatial settings. And most importantly, a general association of nations to be formed to guarantee its members the political independence and territorial integrity. And we shall see more of that in the next lecture. So this is kind of the framework that the Americans put into place. However, it should be noted that at this particular time, 1917-1918, war weariness is a disease that spreads across the world, and certainly across the big metropolitan centers like London, Paris. People, there are in London and elsewhere, there is a wave of radicalization. People are, to put it simply, sick and tired of fighting without any real outcome, and there is a great push of radicalization. And this is important in a place which is not in the core of Europe, but in the periphery, Russia, because it shapes the greatest event maybe that happens during the First World War in 1917 and shapes the future of the world order, and that is the October Revolution in Russia, or the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. A key thing to bear in mind, we don't have, during 1917, we don't have one revolution in Russia, but we have two. Early 1917, the war weariness, the economic challenges make a push for undermining the authority of the Tsar, the great autocracy of the that survives across the world, and there is a conclave of politicians, liberal politicians, also radical and socialist politicians that take the Tsar and Tsar's authority out of the frame, and they form a provisional government. What's interesting is that between the beginning of 1917 and all the way through to November, for a few months, that is to say, less than a year, a small group that is quite a minority in this new provisional government that is formed in Russia manages to become the majority and wins the army, and the people take the army and the people on their side. And this is the Bolsheviks. And it's an extraordinary event, how the Bolsheviks came into power, mainly supported by the army and the people, with a one clear promise, and that maybe explain why from a minority they become a majority within only a few months. And the clear promise was the end of the war. What do they claim, the Bolsheviks? They claim that they seek the equality and sovereignty of the peoples of Russia. They talk as well the language of self-determination, but in opposition to Wilson, where the language is about the national self-determination of peoples that are being held captive, in greater empires, the Bolsheviks focus and stress on the social question. They feel and they argue that the war that Russia finds itself in is actually a war that is an imperialist war. It's a war that it serves none of the interests of the Russians, and it also impedes the cause of bringing the aim of bringing a socialist transformation in the Russian society and economy. So the immediate effect is, and now we're in 1918, that Russia pulls out of the war, they negotiate a treaty with Germany. And this creates also waves of uncertainty across the allied nations, Americans, British, French, because they see all of a sudden Germany being aggrandizing, maybe realizing the dream of quote unquote a Middle Europe, a Central Europe that will care for Germany's, that will allow Germany to extend its influence in Central Europe. However, and this is the interesting twist of the war, only a few months after Russia has pulled out of the war, many feel that now Germany's dreams of domination are actually materializing. A few months so after that, the war ends, and the war ends with a surprising victory of the Allies. It's key to bear in mind here, and that will be the last bit I will of this segment, that many scholars argue that around November 1918, the Allies didn't really have any clear military on the strategic front. Things were somehow even. There was a stalemate. However, a sequence of events that also has to do with the transformations and the reverberations of the socialist revolution in Russia, a series of events undermine Germany's strategic and political capabilities and allow the German politicians to seek a compromise and effectively sign their own defeat. And everyone is jubilant, but does the war come to an end in 1918? How can we assess the way the war ends? These are questions that we will discuss in the next lecture. Thank you.